the first question. Who wants to define masculinity? Who wants to take a crack at this one?
I feel like you should, Don.
I mean, well, as men, we're taught something I feel completely different than what it really is, but I feel like a man is a provider in my eyes. But even that, nowadays, like, women are turning to bosses. So I feel like masculinity is kind of just like a term that was given, but not really, it shouldn't be owned like that.
I mean, I feel like the term masculinity is kind of a non-term anymore. Like, I don't really even know what that means. Like, what applies to masculinity anymore? Because, I mean, I think of myself as somewhere in the mixture of all of it, but I have lots of friends who will say, no, we think you're really masculine. And I'm like, but what do you consider masculine if you consider me masculine? Which is cool, because they must consider masculinity as something totally different now. So,
I mean, I could agree with that same statement. I think because of the way I dress, people automatically assume that, like, I'm like a dyke, like a real masculine, butchy girl. And I'm like, no, honestly, I'm just a woman who prefers to wear baggier clothes. So,
even as a non-binary person, it's very difficult to define masculinity without gendering it. And most of the time, we define masculinity as being an aggressive, maybe violent, non-emotional person. And these are attributes that we give to men, right? But I firmly believe, and as someone that was raised by a single mother, that masculinity can be perpetuated by both men and women and non-binary people at all times. So I think that would leave it there for now.
No, I think that's great, and that's a really good point. And we've all kind of hit on the negatives of masculinity, but Dawn was touching on the positives of masculinity, right? Dawn, can you explain how striving for masculinity or looking towards masculinity has been a positive influence for you, or has been something that has made you what you perceive to be a better man?
Yeah, well, coming up, my mother raised me pretty much by herself, but the men that were in my life, it wasn't really like a positive. Like, I feel like as a kid, as a young male, it's always kind of like, how many women are you gonna have? Or are you a fighter? Are you gonna fight? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's really aggressive, but at the same time, I learned, like, you gotta provide for your family. You have to protect your family. So masculinity in those terms are like, being a protector, like if something's happening in the household, as the man, you step up and make sure everything is straight. So I think in that aspect is where I see like the masculinity as more of a positive, as like the protector. But even then, like, we were born to be lovers, not fighters. So as a man, like, I see women who are the protectors in the relationship. Like, I know a lot of girls that are like, they wear the pants in the relationship, and if something goes down, they're the, you know what I'm saying, the protectors. So
yeah. On the flip side, we have a term called toxic masculinity, which we're all very familiar with, right? How did toxic masculinity, what kind of expectations were you set up for as a young man growing up where you felt you couldn't live up to these expectations of what masculine or what men should be?
I think, well, one is coming up, I think it's like being a player. Like, how many girlfriends do you have? But being an only child and seeing my mother in and out of relationships and how she was treated in her relationships kind of made me want to go more towards having one woman and making sure I treat her right, you know what I'm saying? Rather than, of course, as a man, like, you're like, you want to fit in, you're like, oh, I want to see how many girls I can have, but mentally in your mind, it's like, you know you're supposed to have one woman you provide for, build her up, and not worry about any other chick. So I think with me coming up, that was like a tough one, being an only child, trying to fit in with the group of guys around and how their lifestyles were with how they treat women or fighting. I'm not really much of a fighter, but you gotta try to fit in with the crowd as a male. So those are like the two biggest things I think coming up.
Right. Devin-Norelle, this must be an interesting conversation for you because we talk a lot about how toxic masculinity plays a role in the transition process, right? And how we have to unlearn toxic masculinity. But I imagine that these mores of masculinity were applied to you once you started to present as more transmasculine, right? How did that all come up, and how did you learn how to process that?
To be honest, I'm not really sure I actually completely processed it yet. I will definitely say for people that transition, especially people along the transmasculine spectrum, we kind of emphasize masculinity, especially toxic masculinity, more because we want to be seen and read and accepted as men or as masculine people. So many of the times we end up becoming perhaps a little bit more misogynistic towards people who are identified as women or towards femmes than cis people do in a really weird way, just so that we are accepted by other cis people. And for me, it took me, I think, at least 2 or 3 years to really explore what was going on and understand that I didn't really need to behave in this way towards women, and that it didn't make me more or less of a man, and I don't even identify as a man, but it didn't make me even more or less as a masculine person, and I shouldn't really worry about how other people see me. My masculinity, actually, when I'm dressed more femme, I feel more masculine then, but it took me a while to come to terms with that. It took me it took a lot of self-exploration to understand that masculinity is not defined by being an emotionless person. Masculinity is about being vulnerable with your friends and your family and even people that you're romantic with. Masculinity is not about treating women like as if they're down or below you. And the thing is, I have so many things that fall against me, and why am I treating other people like shit when I'm a black person, I'm a trans person, I'm a trans masculine person, I'm non-binary, and sometimes present as femme? I really shouldn't be treating other people this way, and I hope I don't treat you that way, Phil, at work.
Never.
But it really boiled down to a lot of self-exploration and understanding that masculinity doesn't have to be this way, have to be toxic in ways that harm other people, and then also understanding the ways that it harmed myself. My mental health was deteriorating in great ways, and I didn't understand why until I went to therapy and talked these things out. So yeah, it just takes a lot of self-exploration, I would say.
Thank you for sharing. That was beautiful.
Sure.
We talk about toxic masculinity as though it's a term, right? And Fox News and all these people would like to pretend that this is something that liberals invented. But toxic masculinity has very serious repercussions, right? How masculinity presents itself in society directly leads to the marginalization of queer and trans people, people of color, and of course, women. Would anyone be willing to share a little bit more about how toxic masculinity is actually hurting society and like the tangible ways you've seen how masculinity hurts society?
Oh, can I just follow up on what I just said? The first thing is
go ahead.
just our mental health, as masculine presenting people or people that consider themselves masc. We are essentially hurting ourselves by not being vulnerable with other people or not seeking out the help to better ourselves mentally. And these are why, for instance, so many of the shootings that have occurred around this country are perpetuated by men that, I'm thinking of the one that has happened in California maybe 2 or 3 years ago, where the man shot up a school just because some girl didn't want to give him his number. And I think he was also a part of that movement of, I forget what is it, they pick up women.
Incels?
Sorry?
The incel movement?
I think that might be it. There was a different name for it, but it was just a part of a greater movement of men where pickup artists, where they consider themselves pickup artists and that they couldn't get women, then it was a problem, it was the woman's fault, and that they should do something about it. And this all stems from toxic masculinity, and that is just like something we need to do in terms of our mental health, in terms of getting therapy, in terms of talking things out, and also understanding that women's bodies belong to them and not to us.
I mean, I see it all the time with a lot of my friends who are female, and they work in these like corporations with like these old white guys that run them, and so many times, I'm sure everyone here has experienced it, where someone, it's like, oh, no, like the big boys are talking, and not in that like extreme way, but it's just kind of like, we're not gonna listen to your opinion because you're a woman. And I hear these stories, and I'm kind of like, what? Like, women should be running everything. So, like, literally, when I hear that, I'm kind of like, that's the direct, like, that's it. Like, that's toxic masculinity happening at the most important moment, because that's, like, blocking someone's paycheck. Like, that's blocking someone's growth. So that can only trickle down into, like, mental, it goes to everything once you're working in like a work environment where you're just surrounded by toxic men.
Sure. And I would add the election of our president is a direct result of toxic masculinity and its pervasiveness in the country, which is now resulting in policies that are harming marginalized communities almost every single day, it seems like. But I want to piggyback off of that, Troy, because you battle notions of masculinity in your work and in your presentation, of course. And you recently released a song last year called G's. and the music video addressed forms of toxic masculinity in a very creative way. Can you explain a little bit more?
Yeah, so we did the song G's. I did the song G's. I don't know who we is. And when I was writing it, I wanted to do something that was kind of like a coming at you kind of song, but I was like, who am I coming at? And I realized that just everybody that pissed me off were people who were putting down people who weren't straight white men, honestly. So I think it turned into this like toxic masculinity anthem for me. So when we created the video, I was like, how are we gonna represent that in a really fun, playful, but like very pointed way? So we did, it's a male beauty pageant, and all the contestants are like different toxic masculinity tropes. So you have like the mansplainer, and you have the manspreader, which I'm sure everyone in New York has seen when you're on the subway and there's a dude who's just like this on the train. So like we had all these different types of people represented in the pageant, and the audience and the judges were made up of women and queer people and people of color, all who were kind of watching this take place, just being kind of like, we're not even gonna really judge you and tell you that you're wrong. We're just gonna tell you like, you can be better. And so that was kind of the overarching message of it. There was like no real winner because they all won, because of course every toxic person has to win. So it was a whole like message of just like, we are the ones watching this, and we can actually take back the control and tell these people who are doing these terrible things, you can do better.
Right. Saya, you also address issues and themes in your own music and in your own art form. I'm wondering if you can explain if you've ever experienced toxic masculinity in the music industry in particular.
That's amazing, because I've been in the game over 20 years, and that's all female MCs experience. It's such a male-dominated industry, and even with the way I look and dress, and how I when I step into a room, how I gain the attention of a room, I'm kind of like a threat to a man who's in the room who also feels like he has to be even more masculine and more degrading and like just craziness. But it really sucks for females in the industry, because ultimately it harbors us from moving forward the way we deserve to, when men are moving forward in the game every single day at a fast pace. I guess they just feel like women are supposed to be here and stay there, when in fact we're female MCs and we're very vocal and boisterous, and we're gonna say what is on our mind for the right reasons, because it's our time.
Right, absolutely. And I also want to point out, because I know that the conversations around misogyny happen specifically in the hip hop community, but you know, it's been my perception that that's a pretty unfair targeting of just one genre of music. Is that also, like, this is a pervasive issue that affects the whole music industry and is cross genres, correct?
It's all over the music industry. It's not just in hip hop. It's everywhere you go, every room you walk in. It's up at the labels with the executives. It's with the artists. It's with the artist teams, so on and so forth.
One thing that you mentioned earlier was your presentation and how people expect you to be manly, right? And because I'm femme in my relationship, my boyfriend is more masculine than me, people will do things like give my boyfriend the check at dinner, right?
I always get the check. The check comes straight to me. I'm like, we both women. Can she pay? I'm confused.
Hello? What is wrong with straight people thinking that one of us has to be a man and one of us has to be the woman in the relationship?
I mean, I handle my business in my relationship, but I still want to get taken care of like I'm a woman too.
Hell yes. Troy, I mean, as a queer person also, I'm sure you experience these different expectations that, like, if you're a man in this world, then you should be behaving this way. And also, if you're a feminine gay man, you somehow lose sexual currency, right? There are these grinder gays who are like, mask for mask only. If you talk with the lisp, I'm going to block you, et cetera, et cetera.
I mean, I noticed it when I first came out and I learned about like the bear community, which if nobody knows what the bear community is, it's like bigger, hairy gay men. And so when I found this community, I was like, oh my God, like my people. And coming out, I was like still not really sure about my, you know, feminine side. I didn't know anything about myself yet. I was learning it all. So when I first came out and the community was like welcoming me, they were like, oh my gosh, like this like mask, bearded dude, like it was a whole thing, and I was like so wanted. And then as I was like, I want to like express myself the way I really want to express myself, which is like this. And the more I do this, the more those people start to like trickle out and they're like not as attracted. And I'm like, you're not attracted because I have nails and I wear a jumpsuit? Like that's crazy to me. But it's right in the proof is in the pudding. That shows you there is this idea of like, especially within the gay community of like, you know, gay people, gay men, especially gay bears want other gay bears to be like masculine and rugged and wear flannel and do the whole thing. But to me, I'm like, it's just not like mentally healthy for me.
Totally. Well, whoever's passing you by, that is their loss, baby.
Honestly. And I have a wonderful fiance now, so we're good, you guys. No worries.
I see that ring. Put a ring on it. So, Don, you're heterosexual. I'm sorry.
We got you up here looking like you one of us.
Hey, I'm here. We all the same people. It's all good.
No, gay people are better.
I'm dead.
As a straight cis guy, are you ever concerned with hearing language like toxic masculinity or men are trash or there's a war on men? Does this ever like put you on the defensive at all?
Well, it definitely sucks when you hear all men are trash and blah, 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 because it's like, well, I tried my hardest to be a good male, you know, but we still get put in a box. But at the same time, like, we do it to ourselves because men continually do messed up stuff and whatever, so we kind of do it to ourselves. But, I mean, we just have to do better as men, I think, as straight men, definitely.
How have you intervened when you see toxic masculinity happening among fellow cisgender straight male friends?
Well, you know, as I've gotten older, I feel like I've become more aware and try to do better about it. As a young kid coming up, like, I used to be judgmental towards gay people, and I used to feel like men had the upper hand on women and whatnot. But as I got older and I started hanging out with, like, having gay friends, and I was like in my mind, I used to think every gay guy was gonna hit on you, and that was that. But then as I got older, I realized, like, it's respect. Like, everybody's still respectful. Like, if I'm not gay, they're like, you're not gay, you're my brother now. You know what I'm saying? And as I got older, I realized, like, everybody has the same type of feelings. Like, I have some gay friends that are way more loyal, way more, like, better people than some of my straight friends. So I learned to not be so judgmental in that category, and then I learned to treat women better, and I started seeing, like, how people in the industry use their power to, like, get what they want out of women, and just how corrupt everything is, and it's just really sad, honestly.
Absolutely. So, Devin-Norelle, I want to come back to this topic specifically of mental health and why you think there's such a barrier for men or male-identifying folks or people who are masculine of center, right, to speak about their feelings, right? Like, what has your experience there been as you become more of an advocate for people to seek mental health treatment and to basically allow themselves to have these difficult conversations?
Well, I think personally, from my experience, is a bit layered. I'm a trans-masculine person, but I'm also black. And I grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood of Harlem, where, in a black community, in a black household, where therapy was just thought of as the white thing to do. It was never really an option for us, and I guess even if it were, it wasn't something that was affordable. And so I realized that also when I tell people that they need to seek therapy, that comes from a place of a privilege where I have access to it. It's something that's been discussed between, say, me and you at work or other folks at work, among my friends that understand that we need it. But in a way, I understand why men don't go seek these things, because I have witnessed the way that my older brother was raised in comparison to myself. And it was just completely two different trajectories. My brother could go and do anything that he wanted, and it was just expected of him to be macho, beefy, aggressive. He'll deal with his own emotions by letting it out in that way, whereas I had to be extremely feminine, sit a certain way, act a certain way. I couldn't do this and that. But my access to therapy for both of us was limited in different ways. One, in that neither one of us, because we lived in the hood and didn't have money, couldn't get it, and our mom didn't believe that it was something that we needed, especially for him because he was a man. Well, why does he need therapy? He's a man. Go play some football. And so when I encourage masculine people to, or masculine assertive people to seek out therapy now, I do let them know that I think because we have this movement, people are more aware that we can access therapy through insurance. We can access it through Medicaid, through Medicare. We can find someone that has a sliding scale. There are people that understand that there are communities that that cannot find therapy because they can't afford it, and we'll give it to them for free. It might not be the best therapy, but it's out there, and we can provide those resources. Shit, I might even write an article for the Out and say, here's how you get some therapy today. That's really kind of one of the ways, it's just talking about it on Instagram, talking about it on social media, Facebook, finding the resources and passing it on to my friends and so on, email chains, etc. But just letting people know the importance of therapy and how it has changed my life so much. I can't say I'm any less aggressive, but I'm a little bit nicer. And I think just someone, in general, just speaking about it out loud has helped not just me, but other people say, oh, wow, like this really changed your life. What can I do to get it? You know, I think it just takes someone saying that it has helped me for them to actually want to seek it out.
Last question for anyone who would like to answer it before we move to audience Q&A. What should a good man do? What makes a good man?
Do we have an extra hour?
Right.
Try it in a sentence.
I mean, I think the most important thing anyone can do, including a good man, is just be good. Like, have goodness in your heart when you treat other people. Think about how you want to be treated and treat them the same way. If we really do think that way, like if you really break that down to the very nitty-gritty of treating someone as your equal, I think all of this would go away, because no one would want to be treated that way. But I understand that a lot of toxic men haven't been, this is why we need an hour, a lot of toxic men haven't been taught that like what they perceive as good and bad isn't necessarily good and bad. So when you see something, say something. Like the best you can do.
I would say what can make a great man is being honest, loyal, respectful, having morals, standing his ground, uplifting women, uplifting black men, or just men in general next to them, being more forefront, and yeah, just overall being a great human. At the end of the day, I think a lot of people forget that outside of genders and all of the things that we just spoke about, we're human, and that's first. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you gotta, as a man, we gotta build each other up. Women, men, like, be thoughtful. A lot of people in general, they don't think before they do things, or they're quick to judge other people. You just gotta think, like he said, how do you want to be treated as yourself? And once you take that into terms and you're thoughtful and you care more about the human race in general, then you don't look at people as gender or color or sex. You just look at them as yourself and how you want to be treated. And I feel like things get better. That's how I look at life.
Yeah, pretty much the same. I would say uplifting all marginalized communities, uplifting women, uplifting black men, uplifting gay men, uplifting trans people, non-binary people. It could even come down to not so basic, but even more basic things is making sure your partner gets an orgasm first. Just like, this is how you uplift things. Like, don't be selfish. Stop being selfish and make sure that whoever you are dating or whoever's in your life, that they're taken care of in the right way.
Don't be DJ Khaled.
Sorry?
Nothing, it was a joke. I would also add, read books by women, monitor how much you're talking in a room, especially if there are women in the room, and make sure that you're giving space at the table for women to speak, and make sure you make eye contact when women are speaking. Okay, we have a few audience questions, I believe.
I see.
Who's up first?
She's over there.
Do you think that more therapy targeted men?
Ooh.
Sorry. Okay, hi.
Hi.
So, one, thank you for talking about mental health towards men. One of my best friends was a guy committed suicide, and I think it needs to be talked about. So, my question is, do you think therapy targeted towards men is needed, if that makes sense? Rather, like a therapist where their main focus is guys? Or do you think it just needs to be talked about more?
Devin-Norelle, why don't you take that one?
Wow, that's a great-ass question. I don't necessarily believe that you need therapy, specifically gauged towards men, I think that if we all went to therapy, if we were all expected to treat our mental health the same from the get-go as children, as teenagers, even into our adulthood, we wouldn't even have to ask that question. So I just think that we need to go to therapy and find the resources for it. Ask around, find that person that went and ask what their experience was about and if it was good, and go.
Honestly, I feel like mental health starts in the household first. The way you are raised, who you're raised around. Also, the older you get, the people that you surround yourself with is also a big part of your mental health. I suffer from severe anxiety and depression on a daily basis, but I still have to get up every day and walk outside and be famous and be a rapper. And I think a lot of people forget that, you know, us too, we go through things, but I think it definitely starts in the household. And if you can find a way to speak about it, I'm a rapper, so for me it's music, but whatever it is that you have that's a passion for, that should be your way to deal with it.
Another question from the audience.
Yeah? Okay. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
This is open for anyone to answer. A lot of you guys kind of brought to light your decision to change how you value your mental health was basically all your journeys, but it wasn't implemented initially in the household. So how has your journey in breaking those mental barriers affected your relationships with those people that didn't necessarily implement the value?
Oh man. I think after the point that I'm at now, anyone who was in my past that didn't build me up to be this person, I've tried to show them how to be this way, like how to think more openly and to be more accepting and non-judgmental. And honestly, it's the hardest thing to do, but anyone who doesn't kind of fall in line is just out. Anyone who doesn't build you up just doesn't deserve to have space in your life. So it's a hard thing to do, but that's just how I've been able to handle it.
Yeah, even if this is your family too, I feel like we should say that. Even if it's your family members.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
My family, especially my aunt, who I'm super close with, of course, I feel like anybody around you who doesn't deal with mental health issues are at first not sure how to deal with it. But I think now, the older that I've gotten, the more expressive I've gotten and honest I've become about my mental health. My aunt has definitely stepped up to the plate and even asked questions, you know, as far as my mental health. So that's super important.
John also brought something up here that's relevant that I think is super important, but that you had a journey of figuring things out and then learning from your past, right? And I grew up in a really Catholic, conservative, Republican family, and I had to unlearn sexism, I had to unlearn racism, I had to unlearn homophobia, I had to unlearn a lot that I was taught since I was a child. And it wasn't until I had a teacher in 5th grade who was a woman who handed me books to read and movies to watch, and she saw me not as someone who was a bad kid, but as someone who was a victim of their environment. And then she made a vested interest in helping me out of that, right? And that was a turning point for me. And I'm so grateful to her for that. But a lot of that stuff can happen in education circles. It can happen in your church community even. And it's so important to have a life in a chosen family outside of your family. Okay, well, everyone give it up for our lovely panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you.